Coming up, the New York Football Giants are heading to training camp, and we ask the key questions. Who is the most exciting rookie to watch after Malik Neighbors? What veteran is being elevated to a key role that could put them in a difficult spot with the fan base? And who are the indispensable members of Big Blue? We dive in coming up next. Yes, sir. It is OGP on a Friday, the One Giant podcast, where you know that we are your host. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Mackwitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise. We're working our way through July, Andy, and finally working our way towards training camp, where some real answers can be provided by this roster for the upcoming season.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, Adam. Obviously, this is when you start getting into the grind. Rookies report first for training camp. They have already been in the building. And obviously, there's so much excitement around Malik Neighbors. But to your point, training camp is where we start to see things. We start to see maybe the philosophies of the coaching staff. We start seeing different things like who are the players that are going to get the first opportunity to grab a starting role. And we're also going to see players flash that we're super excited about that may or may not actually perform in the regular season, which we know has happened historically with the Giants.
Oh, baby, there's been some of those concerns. Yeah, who are the guys that we've irrationally hyped? Ryan Dunleavy pointed out kind of a couple of names and maybe a theme for the New York Football Giants in years past. We'll get to that as well. But off the top here, we know the New York Football Giants, they brought in six young men in the NFL draft: Malik Neighbors, Tyler Nubin, Andrew Phillips, Theo Johnson, Tyrone Tracy Jr., and of course, Darius Muasau, the I think the unheralded and already forgotten draft member for the New York Football Giants. But out of that list, and we say after Malik Neighbors, because we all know that's the guy everybody wants to see in training camp, already being called a Jamar Chase clone. Why not? Just keep heaping things on top of this kid before he's really stepped on the field. Who are you most excited to watch in training camp? And it can be for all the right or potentially all the concerning reasons.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, Adam, because you have a lot of guys that we're excited about. You have a lot of guys that maybe we weren't familiar with before the Giants drafted him. A guy like Tyrone Tracy Jr., who is an intriguing prospect. But what I think about when I go into training camp in situations like this is who is the most important? Like, which one do we have to absolutely hit on
Yeah.
because we have no other alternative? Like, for me, I look at someone like Tyrone Tracy and I'm like, I hope he does well. But we also have Jay-Sean Corbin. We have Eric Gray. We have a whole host of players. And we also have, obviously, Devin Singletary leading the pack. It feels like we want him to be impactful, but I don't think the season is reliant on him being as impactful as he could be, right? You know, you look at Tyler Nubin. You have Jalen Mills. You have Jason Pinnock. You have Dane Belton. It is not imperative that Tyler Nubin is the guy that we hope he is. Now, we obviously want that to be the case, but it's not imperative. To me, I look at Dru Phillips and I say, it is imperative that Dru Phillips plays well because where he was drafted and what the team looks like, it requires him to be a potential, at least rotational piece at the start of the season, if not grab the starting job by the horns. We know what Darnay Holmes is. He comes back on basically a minimum deal. We kind of know what we think Cordell Flott is a little bit, which is kind of erratic, don't necessarily know how he'll be on the outside. For me, Dru Phillips has every opportunity to grab a starting role immediately and really not relinquish it to any of the other guys on the roster.
No, it's a big part of it. I think that to me resonated as one of the obvious players to look out of this draft class. And you frame it the right way with it's like Tyrone Tracy Jr. Again, as you get to the fifth round, the fourth, fifth, and sixth round, you obviously think about those players differently. So you're not going to heap a ton of expectation on them. And then positionally, right? Like, again, we're going after Malik Neighbors here, but there's a lot of still young talent in the wide receiving core as well, with Jalen Hyatt, with Wan'Dale Robinson. So you think about that group and say, even though obviously we're going to be focused on Neighbors, you still have other players you're excited about. Dru Phillips, it's a both and. It's because where he was drafted, third round, the team seems to have a hype in him. The post-draft kind of coverage around him, I think, got the fan base a little bit more excited on him too, to say, oh, it seems like there was a bit of a buzz around what he potentially could be. And then it's what the team lacks at the position, because it's twofold. We're going to talk about Cordell Flott when we think about veterans that are being elevated in expectations. But now he's being talked about on the outside for the New York Football Giants. Makes training camp exciting. Darnay Holmes is one of those other players. And one of the things I will acknowledge here. So you go over on Player Profiler for Darnay Holmes. He is a player who has had not necessarily a massive snap share. He had a coverage rating of plus 23.8. The man coverage success rate, 70%. Catch rate allowed, just over 70%. Passer rating was 100 when he was targeted. He's an interesting player from the perspective of, I think we've gotten to a place with him where we assume the ship has already sailed, and maybe he's trying to claw some of that back. He's brought in some special teams value for himself. But if you are a holdover, as he is from a previous regime, and if you are the new regime that just brought in a shiny toy, Dru Phillips gets a lot of hype here for me. Dru Phillips gets a lot of focus here in training camp to say, if you come in and look not even elite, but look pretty good, I think it's pretty easy to go, okay, it's your job. It's your job to lose now, as opposed to Darnay Holmes needing to really claw back to win it.
I mean, listen, we talked about this, Daniel Jones, a little bit, like chicken or the egg. Like Darnay Holmes in limited snaps has looked questionable, and it's like, well, if we give him more snaps, is he going to flourish? Like, is he going to really like break into the mold? And Adam, if you look at, Pro Football Focus is not the be all end all of everything, but 2021 he had a 55.
Solid.
2022 he had a 43, which obviously
Not
was
as good.
when a lot of
Not as
people
good, Andy.
sold their Darnay Holmes stock. And then
Yeah.
last year had a 63.9, albeit, as you mentioned, in a little bit more limited snaps. And so,
Yeah.
like, when you confine him and you say, just we need you for a handful of snaps here or there, he might be able to do it in a pinch. It feels like when you expand his role, albeit like 2022, when he had a 43, that's where you get into the challenges, which is why, to your point, and I think what we're both agreeing on, that's why Dru Phillips is so important, because we know, or we think we know, that if we expand Darnay Holmes' role to what we wish it would be, it's
Yeah.
going to be an unmitigated disaster.
Well, yeah, well, that was damn, man. That was harsh. But
I
Darnay
mean,
Holmes, man. Keep
hold
your
on.
head up, Darnay.
The only thing I'm also going to say is
Yeah.
this whole the
You
one
really
thing I want
you
to make
gut
clear
punched me
too.
there. I felt gut punched for Darnay Holmes right there.
Well, the other thing I want to make very clear
Yeah.
is, to me, and maybe this is not the right way of thinking of it, but it's the
Okay.
way that I think of it. Daniel Jones was drafted by the old regime,
Yes. No,
but
this is
Joe
different.
Shane and Brian Daboll signed him to a new contract extension. That, for me, de facto means they are in the boat. It's like they may as well have drafted him. Darnay Holmes was drafted by a different regime. Dave Gettleman drafted him. However, Darnay Holmes was brought back by this regime to play again. And so when you do that, you are co-signing the fact that you believe that this guy can be a contributor. And
Yeah.
I can no longer kind of put it on Dave Gettleman or previous decision making. Like the second that Joe Shane is the one that's signing over on the dotted line, it becomes his responsibility to get the most out of these players.
And as we know, watching on Hard Knocks, when they said, "Hey, if we go get you Brian Burns, are you excited, Shane Bowen?" He said, "Yes, I am." He goes, "Great, because that's all you're getting. So you better figure out the rest of it." And that's why even with Dru Phillips, even with Tyler Newman in the safety room as well, it's still about, hey, you got to take these parts, some of which are not as shiny as we hope they would be, and make the best out of it. So hopefully Dru Phillips shines there. Coming up here in a second, I have another player on the rookie list that I think is a fun watch here come training camp, and already has put a classic cloud that only Big Blue can provide even before they get on the field. We'll dive into that and veterans to watch coming up here in just one moment. And as we continue today's One Giant podcast, we let you know it's brought to you by Pietential, Pietential. That spells Pietential. It is a free online assessment tool for individual users. It sets a baseline for your well-being, gives you tools to improve, and tracks your progress over time. Whether it's physically on the field or in between the ears in the film room, plenty of these rookies should be thinking about, how do I make sure that I'm keeping myself on the level and ready to perform on Sundays for the New York Football Giants. Check out Potential today. The other guy for me out of this rookie room, before we turn over to veterans, because I think there's a lot of guys to watch in that regard, is Theo Johnson. Classic tight end discussion here for the New York Football Giants. Going to be on the PUP list to start. Gotta love that. A little bit of an injury bug for him. Not perceived to be that big of a concern. But the reason why you circle, double stamp, and underline him is because the exit of retired Darren Waller, You still have, obviously, Daniel Bellinger. You brought in some other guys. I have this low-key love and affection for one Lawrence Cager, and I'm very excited to watch him over the course of training camp. But Theo Johnson, even though it is a fourth-round pick, because of the position, because of the guys that haven't really been getting big reps there, and maybe whether it was intentional injury or production, Daniel Bellinger, apple of the eye 2 seasons ago, got put on the back burner for a Darren Waller this last season. So Theo Johnson becomes a really interesting watch for me because the position needs it. And he's the athletic tight end that maybe can take on that role.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, when you think about Darren Waller retiring and you think
Oh,
about
yeah.
what the Giants have done to reshape and reform that tight end room, Theo Johnson isn't a like for like replacement from Darren Waller. Darren Waller has been a Pro Bowler, obviously at his peak when healthy. Darren Waller is a top three or four tight end in the NFL. But the profile of what Theo Johnson can bring to the team is very similar to what
Yeah.
Darren Waller does. In fact, it's almost uncanny how they kind of swapped it out, thinking, he's obviously got really good hands. He's a good route runner. He can stretch the field vertically with his athleticism, but he's not the best blocker. Now, he has the size and the frame to become an able, willing, and capable blocker, but that's not really why the Giants drafted him, out of Penn State. It kind of makes you think. They look at him towards the explosiveness. Lawrence Cager probably fits into that build a little bit more with his vertical capabilities. It makes it seem that Daniel Bellinger is going to be the guy that is playing the primary down snaps at tight end, but is a much more willing blocker
Yeah.
than Theo Johnson's going to be. But if you need that explosiveness and you need to move the ball over the middle of the field, Theo Johnson and Lawrence Cager are your guys. We love Daniel Bellinger. We love him,
Yeah.
and he can catch the ball. He can be athletic, but that's not really what they're asking him to do, right? They're asking him to be able to be. They're asking Daniel Bellinger to be in on plays where it could be a run or a pass. And Theo Johnson is like, okay, it's 3rd and 9. They know that we have to get the ball down the field. We're not going to be keeping him in for a run play here. That's why I kind of look at the explosiveness of those two trying to replace Darren Waller as opposed to Bellinger.
Yeah, and I think this is it's not a knock on Daniel Bellinger. He has good speed. You mentioned he had good hands. And, rookie season more impressive from a stat standpoint. But I think it's just about when you look at him, it's about what the organization did. They got Darren Waller, I think, to be like, okay, now Daniel Bellinger, you focus on the blocking aspect, on being an inline tight end for us at times. Now all of a sudden you fast forward and it's, well, was he ready to do more or not? And then you include the draft pick, obviously, of Theo Johnson, it elevates it. One other thing I'll mention here, real quick. I want to go ahead and just read a little something to you. Linebacker with muscular build and an unrelenting desire to chase after the football. This player plays with a phenomenal motor and has the instincts and recognition to get the jump on blocking schemes. He plays with good initial quickness, but lacks the extended pursuit speed in space. He will take shots downhill to spoil the action, but teams will have to live with missed tackles and inconsistent leverage in his pursuit. That is going to be Darius Muasau. That is going to be the linebacker. It's just little footnote, because guess what? They need players in the linebacker room. We've talked about this, the depth, the Darian Beavers of it all. So watching him is just going to be fun. Not going to put high elevation. He's a 6th-round pick. We don't want to fall into a Trey Hawkins scenario where we all start getting irrationally overhyped about somebody and then really start judging them when they don't quite meet expectations.
Yeah,
Now,
Darius, I was just going to quick footnote. Darius is going to be interesting. I'm going to look at the camp battle as things progress between him and Darian Beavers to see who
yeah,
might be the guy that's going to be that backup complimentary in case of emergency type role. I think I don't want to oversimplify this, but I think they overlap a lot in their skill set and where they may sit on this roster. So it's a natural kind of progression to be able to put them together and say, watch the camp battles between them and see who gets what reps during training camp.
5.89 prospect grade, by the way, for Darius coming out. That's an average backup or special teamer. And when you think about it, that's when these camp battles, a lot of times when you're talking about backup players, also go ahead and think about, well, who's going to play special teams? How many spots are we giving for that? Because that's how you can cement your role on your spot on the roster. And then you try to expand your role. We talked about Darnay Holmes before. That's how he's stuck around with this team. He confirmed that he can have value beyond just the secondary. Okay. Now we turn our attention over to the veterans. The other thing that happened for the New York Football Giants this offseason, in addition to their rookie draft class, was they added in another 8 players: Drew Lock, Devin Singletary, Allen Robinson, Jermaine Illuminor, John Runyon, Aaron Stinney, the three offensive linemen, to go along with the big trade acquisition in Brian Burns and then Jalen Mills. A lot of guys exited this offseason from not only backup Tyrod Taylor, as we saw in Hard Knocks, but key players like Xavier McKinney, Saquon Barkley, Adoree Jackson, for whatever the state of his game is. Also, Darren Waller, as you mentioned before, via retirement. Who do you look at in this veteran group? And it doesn't have to be just the incoming class here, the new additions, but who do you look at as being a key watch for training camp as it relates to team success going forward?
Ooh, as related to team success is interesting. I'm going to give you my hot take first, and we've talked about this. You and I have talked about this a lot off the show, and
Okay.
and I think it's just kind of putting the flag in right now. Is
Mhm.
I I am very concerned about the safety of Azeez Ojulari's roster spot
Oh,
here
yes.
on the 53-man
He
roster.
loves this one.
They obviously did not think that he was a starter that could complement what Kayvon Thibodeau was doing, because they gave Brian Burns his position and traded a second round pick, a fifth round pick, and oh, by the way, gave Brian Burns $30 million. You don't
Oh,
do
big
all of
deal.
that. Yeah, what's a little money in draft capital and basically like mortgaging your future for this
In a
guy?
in a
What
in a in a contract year for Azeez Ojulari at the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
position.
exactly. And Adam, so that we've talked about that a few
Yeah.
times, but I think it's important because he was a very high draft pick coming out of college, and he just has not flourished. And Adam, if you've been watching Hard Knocks the way that you and I have, in terms of like what are they omitting? What are we not seeing here? When they talk about different players, you have not heard Azeez Ojulari's name once, and you may be like, "Well, Andy, that's crazy. We're not talking about a lot of the guys." It's like, I don't know. Ryder Anderson got a shout out. Boogie Basham got a shout out. Where is Azeez Ojulari? It doesn't seem like he is even in any plan. So for me, my veteran highlight is more like, is there tough sledding ahead for Azeez Ojulari to make this roster?
Yeah, it is interesting. And can't and I think the reason why it's a watch even beyond maybe, well, is he long for this roster? It's a contract here. Because we can fast forward next offseason and say he's not on the team. Right. I mean, even if he plays pretty good, he might not be on the team just because you've already invested heavily in Brian Burns. Contracts are going to be coming up for Kayvon Thibodeau. You've already paid Dexter Lawrence. Like, there's money getting spent here. You know that it's just not going to be long for this roster. But more importantly is, if you watch him in training camp and he doesn't look so good, now you're talking about, not only do we know he's not long for this team, but we still need help, right? Maybe it is Anderson. You mentioned some of these, Boogie Basham. Okay, maybe some of these guys step up. I have this low-level desire for Darian Beavers to be kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. But the bottom line is, if he doesn't look good in camp, if he doesn't look, when the injuries are always a concern with him, but if he doesn't look good in camp, then you open up a whole new can of worms and a bag of problems for the New York Football Giants, because now you're saying, okay, great, our starters are elite. We've always said that. But where is the base, right? Where is the overall talent for this team, where when you get to breather reps for some of your starters, you can believe in the guys coming up behind them?
Adam, when you talk about players that are veterans that I'm interested in the success, there's
Yes.
one that I'm very curious about that I don't. I want to see how they deploy this veteran, and that name is Jalen Mills. I am very
Huh. Interesting.
curious about how they plan on working things with Jalen Mills, because think about this, Adam. You have Jason Pinnock, who we know is a locked-in starter. We're hoping that the Giants can maybe sign him long-term. You
Correct.
have former fourth-round draft pick Dane Belton, who we both like a lot and
Mhm.
has shown flashes of athleticism and being a ball hawk. We like that. They also go up in the second round and draft Tyler Nubin, who is explosive and is a playmaker, and everyone is super excited about it. The Giants signed Jalen Mills as that veteran leader. It's only a 1 year, $1.3 million deal. It's about $500,000 in guaranteed money. But I mean, Jalen Mills is a proven veteran, Adam. He is 30 years old and he has been around. And so I'm genuinely curious, like, how do they plan on utilizing Jalen Mills if they already have Pinnock, Belton, Nubin getting a bunch of reps? Not to mention Isaiah Simmons being a nickel type player in certain aspects. Darnay Holmes is still there. Like, what is the role that they're hoping that Jalen Mills can play?
Yeah, I don't know. Right? Like, cornerback slash safety, not going to be a cornerback so much for us. Maybe he's a little bit of that low leverage value in case you're worried about some players. Cordell Flott on the outside. I was going to use Cordell Flott as my guy to watch. We talked about him a lot this offseason. He's going to be a big watch, especially if he's getting the reps on the outside. I don't know. I don't know how to look at Jalen Mills And you mentioned it was like $500,000 guaranteed. Is that enough money that he's definitely going to be here? Because I don't know if he falls closer to the Allen Robinson category or closer to the we want an experienced veteran on this team so that we have that leadership and that trust and that safety net behind guys. And you mentioned someone like Isaiah Simmons. I think it's the same thing here. There's certain guys that fall into this bag. Now, Simmons much younger, higher profile, came out with more expectations, but it all still comes down to like who's carving out what role here. And maybe it ultimately in Shane Bowen's system is going to be looked at as, okay, we believe in Pinnock, obviously, but you mentioned Dane Belton. Well, if Dane Belton starts to find his footing here in Bowen's system, then I think it kind of starts to answer a lot of the questions. Okay, Jalen Mills, you'll be on the roster. I think he has special teams in his bag too. Okay, veteran experience, you're here. But there's going to be a push come to shove, and the good reps need to go to the better players. And I don't. It's a good name to bring up, but my perception would be we don't hear as much about Jalen Mills over the course of training camp, and that's a good thing. Because if we're hearing more about him, it probably means somebody else we're hearing about is a younger player that is not performing so well.
I mean, after not signing Xavier McKinney for that 17, $18 million, the
Yeah.
Giants are spending $3 million on Jason Pinnock, $1 million on Dane Belton, $1.5 million on Tyler Nubin. The room actually isn't that expensive when you look at it. It's probably one of the cheapest safety rooms
Yeah.
in all of the NFL. And so for me, that kind of signifies that one, Jalen Mills is probably safe in terms of making the roster, because you
Yeah.
do need a backup at each of one of the positions. You're talking about only four of them. Unless someone like Javarius Owens steps up and takes the safety position by storm, you
Yeah.
look at those guys, they feel pretty locked in. But I'm curious, like, what's the pecking order? That's really what I'm interested in. Are the Giants saying that Tyler Nubin is starting day one? Or are they saying it's going to be Pinnock and Mills, knowing that they've both been around for quite a while and have that leadership capability?
And I'll very quickly mention Isaiah Simmons. I want to talk about a couple other players here, but Isaiah Simmons is a big watch too. Where is he getting used more? Again, I already said this term once. Jack of all trades, master of none. If you see him lining up in the safety room enough, then what type of congestion does that create there? Because at a certain point, you look in that room, you say, "Oh, okay, four safeties. That makes sense." But now if there's a fifth-ish, or if there's a sixth-ish in Javarius Owens, you're like, what are we doing here? How many bodies can we keep in this room? And you start to ask questions about late draft round picks. Javarius Owens is one of those guys, or players that haven't lived up to the hype, like Isaiah Simmons. The contract tells you, as we've discussed this offseason, he's going to be around. It's just a question of, hey, where's the best role for him? Coming back here in a second, let's talk about that list, though, of incoming players. There's very easy names to circle here, but I'll even include a second-year player that matters for Big Blue. We'll get into that in just one moment. Oh, as we close out today's One Giant podcast, we let you know the episode is also brought to you by Personam. It's an AI cyber threat detection engine that I can totally say easily. And Personam improves your vision into your network security environment and allows you to see cyber threats that other tools and platforms simply cannot do. Personam is always vigilant and always learning. Check out Personam today. So when we go back to that list real quick here and we talk about those incoming players, the changeover. Listen, I could have some fun and say, like, Drew Lock is an interesting guy to watch here. And this has nothing to do with Daniel Jones and whether or not he's the starter. We know that he is. Looks like he's going to come into camp totally healthy with no limitations. That's fantastic. But as we know, Daniel Jones gets injured a lot. You had Tyrod Taylor play. You had Tommy DeVito play. There's just a world where Drew Lock is going to play games this year. And if we're thinking about the overall development of wide receivers like Malik Neighbors, I would love to see that he has a very strong camp in that backup role. But that's a footnote, Andrew, because you cannot get away from the John Runyon and Jermaine Illuminor of it all. And I'll mention their names right inside of John Michael Schmitz because they're all around one another on the interior of this offensive line. I want to be bullish on Illuminor because his social media work is strong. This guy is out there stirring the pot, talking about didn't even know the cameras were there when I was signing my contract. Those little sneaky guys. He's a phenomenal listen, and that's cool. But now I need you to be a phenomenal watch. I need those veterans to come in and claim their roles, and I don't have to care about something that I want to get to here from Ryan Dunleavy. Forgotten names along the way, guys that we got overly hyped on and never came through. So those two players, those veterans really matter in this. And I'll reference the Ryan Dunleavy note. Week one starters that show cause for concern during camp that went overlooked as being confident on when we shouldn't have been. 2018, Eric Flowers, we hardly knew ye. 2019, Antonio Hamilton. 2020, Corey Ballantyne. 2022, Kenny Galladay. And 2023, this was in his special teams role, obviously, one Eric Gray. When you think about guys like that, I'll say that, we're not talking about Evan Neal as we're overly confident in him anymore. But I think we have to look at these other players and say, are we overly confident in Illuminor to claim the starting right tackle role because of how little confidence we have in Evan Neal at this point?
Yeah, so the Illuminor one is interesting. Do we have irrational confidence? I don't, because my expectations for Illuminor are just to play like above replacement level. Like
Matters
just
too,
play
right? What are your expectations? Yeah.
just play mediocre, because that's what the contract is telling that we're bringing him in for. The fact that he has versatility in a pinch, could potentially play right tackle, as they called out on Hard Knocks, which was that little Easter egg that they put in there for us. Left guard, right tackle, he provides versatility. He wants to be here. He's a big, big man. He's exciting. So, like, I kind of have him at, like, if he just plays serviceable, Adam, I am very happy. And so when I think about what you just mentioned, there's a couple of names that come to mind. One,
Just
has
very quickly, very quickly, very
yeah,
quickly. Does the contract for Illuminor allow you to just say, just be above serviceable? It's not a massive deal, but it's also enough money where being serviceable, like relative to what you paid for him and how we saw the desire to get him, it feels like just being serviceable would be fine for us because we've been so just desperate for anything on the offensive line. But it does feel like, oh, that's a low bar for investing some real money into two players collectively when we know the shiny Robert Hunt of it all was out there.
yeah. Well, Adam. So for me, the issue is we've had so many disappointing players that haven't been able to play at replacement level. That's the state of the New York Giants offensive line. You go back to Nate Solder. He's the reason why Andrew Thomas is now here. He got signed the largest left tackle contract in the history. Was horrible. You look at Will Hernandez. We wanted him to play replacement level. He didn't play well. He left and has resurrected his career in Arizona. You look
Yep.
at guys like Shane Lemieux, who we tried year after year to try to have him get a starting role. He couldn't play to replacement level. There's so many guys that were sitting here, and some of them were heavily invested in, some were lightly invested in. Look
Mhm.
at a guy like Mark Lewinsky, who got a very, very similar contract to Jermaine Illuminor. It's about 6 year, $6 million annually. The third year was kind of whatever it was. And so when you look at that, Adam, I'm sitting here saying, I need Jermaine Illuminor to play better than Mark Lewinsky. That's the only thing that I'm saying. Just play better than a replacement level guy, and you have my
Okay.
vote of
Yeah.
confidence. So for
Yeah.
me, my bar is not set to be like, oh, Jermaine Illuminor is going to be the right tackle of the future Pro Bowler. It's like, no, just solidify the offensive line in your one spot and play enough so that we're not looking who's on the bench behind you.
Well, ironically, because I want to get to you saying a couple names that come to mind for you here, and we'll close out on. But it's funny that the other day I mentioned Evan Neal, if he could just be I was on with actually the New York Revival, got on with those guys, El Jefe. Um, if he can just be the 32nd best right tackle in the league, right? Like that would be
Yeah,
enough.
yeah.
Ironically, it's actually the same probably standard you have for Illuminor. Like just be one of the 32 best right tackles, and that'd be more than enough for us for very different reasons. But what you were mentioning about going into some other names that come to mind here.
Well, so not necessarily a free agent or anything like that, Adam. The name that I am circling on here. So I looked at Jordan Phillips first, and I was like, he's important because of the defensive interior, defensive line. Like it would be nice if he took pressure away from Dexter Lawrence, but
Mhm.
his contract isn't that great. He didn't play very well. He's basically just here because he has familiarity from his time at Buffalo. And there's a bunch of guys like Elijah Mitchell and Casey Rogers who they brought in that you're like, maybe Jordan Riley can step up. There's a lot of guys there. So like I kind of moved away from that piece of it. For me, it's John Michael Schmitz. It is John Michael Schmitz where it's like we have this irrational confidence
Yeah.
because he
Yeah.
was drafted so high last year. But when he was on the field and not injured, he did not play well at all. He gave up the fifth most sacks from the interior offensive line as a center. And we
Yep.
thought he was a set it and forget it guy. And now we need to reset our expectations
Yep.
on what John Michael Schmitz can be. We thought he was going to be a top 10 center. Do we need to say he needs to play replacement level or better? Like, what are the expectations for him? Because it feels like everyone's like, No. Last year was an aberration. He's definitely going to crush it this year. Do you feel that way?
And he falls into the Ryan Dunleavy category of like guys that maybe, just maybe we held some irrational confidence in coming into the year. So when you talk about this offensive line, well, now we got Illuminor. Now we got, John Runyon. You heard Joe Shane say, well, we got Andrew Thomas, obviously. Now we add in these guys with JMS right in the middle. And it's like, just so guaranteed that this second year player, the best center in the draft coming out a year ago, all those things, he's just automatically going to correct and improve what was a very, very rocky rookie campaign. Now, we hopefully look at the guys around him last season and say, we improved that and it makes his job easier and it'll be better, and a new offensive line coach as well. So we hope that all does equal success, but no, like, how can you? How can you? And it's like, it's funny, man. All of a sudden we start to look at this and go, whether we think a little bit more for John Runyon, but everything is kind of like, well, just be solid. Everybody just be solid. Andrew Thomas is a stud. If everyone's just solid, then I think some of the parts becomes a good offensive line, right? If everybody plays kind of middle, or let's say they're all ranked at their individual positions somewhere between 19 and 28, well, that plus Andrew Thomas will equal probably a top half offensive line in the league. And I'm not saying they're capable of achieving that as a unit, but that's what it could get you, because it means you're all playing consistent alongside one another. So no, JMS is another one you have to shout out as a second year player.
Adam, and at the end of the day,
Yeah, I think we're there. Let's land the plane.
I think we're at the end of the day.
We put a lot of names out, though. Just to be clear, we covered a lot of ground here. A lot of players to watch, and some hype, some excitement, and then some concerns.
At the end of the day, I just keep going back to, in my head, we make all these different moves. The guard spot, we swap out Saquon Barkley for Devin Singletary. We do all of these things, and at the end of the day, if John Michael Schmitz isn't better, or if Evan Neal isn't better, you're going to see the same thing that you saw last year, and it's going to feel like Groundhog Day for all Giant fans, being like, why can't we have a stable offensive line? Why are we only scoring 13 points a game? It all hinges on John Michael Schmitz solidifying the center so that we don't have to worry about everything else. Man, think about it, Adam. If Evan Neal isn't good and you have to move Jermaine Illuminor, and then who's going to play the guard spot behind him? We don't have any confidence in them, and it all spirals out of control. And we haven't even seen the veterans report for camp yet, and I'm already spiraling on the offensive line.
No, man, and we talked about this the other day. We went through the laundry list of players that have come through. 15 odd guys have rotated through this offensive line over the last 3 to 4 seasons. And every year, hope springs eternal. And we said this too. Joe Shane, so far, if you were pointing at, hey, where has he struggled the most? It's been on the offensive line through the draft and through free agency. He has not answered really yet. Maybe John Michael Schmitz does it this training camp, but as of yet, the only answer he has on his offensive line for sure is Andrew Thomas. And the irony that he was not drafted by Joe Shane is not something that's been lost on this fan base. So it's going to make for a very exciting training camp. You can see there at the last, very bottom line, it says indispensable. There was a conversation about the indispensable Giants that we didn't get to. Coming in next week, though, those guys will also be key watches during training camp for very different reasons. How high are we going to set the bar for some of these elite talents on the New York Football Giants? Rookies, veterans, it's all going to be there, plus key positional battles. So you get over to YouTube at One Giant Podcast, you give us a subscribe, you turn on the alerts, you go and on the podcast feeds, you get us there as well. Give us a glowing 5-star review wherever available. So support our sponsors. I'm okay. And go ahead and enjoy your weekend, friends. We'll be back in on Monday talking all things New York Football Giants. Until then, though, until the next time, until the best times, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.